Thank you very much, Merrill. This evening, North County Climate Change Alliance is very
Howdy,
happy.
Phil.
We're very happy to welcome tonight's speaker, Keith Malone. Keith is the Hydrogen Program Director at RE Plus Events. This organization produces the largest clean energy event in North America. In the fall of 2023, they handled 27,000 participants. Before RE Plus events, Keith led the public affairs for the Hydrogen Fuel Cell Partnership for 11 years. He led the education and the outreach to the policymakers and also handled the communications for the media. During the last 10 years, he's been driving a fancy fuel cell electric car on the streets and freeways, which are dangerous in both LA and Southern California. Currently, he drives a 2021 Toyota Mirai. I'm pleased to welcome Keith Malone and would like to thank him in advance for doing our presentation this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Let's get this started by sharing the screen. And
John Smith here. Why did John Smith get kicked?
Phil, everyone, how does
John
that look?
Smith?
Can everyone see the slides?
Yes.
Great.
John Smith here. Phil Rogel,
So,
please turn off your camera.
As Phil introduced, my name is Keith Malone. I'm the program director for hydrogen at RE Plus Events. We produce the largest renewables as well as the largest energy event in North America. As he said at our last show in Anaheim, we welcomed 27,000 people. Our next one this fall is in Las Vegas, where we're expecting upwards of 30,000 people. And we bring together, you may know us under our previous name, Solar Power International, or SPI. And over the years, we've broadened that agenda to include wind, microgrids, batteries, and increasingly hydrogen. So a little bit about me. These are a few photos of me over the last 11 years in my work with the Hydrogen Fuel Cell Partnership, previously known as the California Fuel Cell Partnership. As you can see in the middle, it looks like I'm doing a dance.
John Smith here.
I call myself
Back again.
a
Phil Rogel.
spokesmodel because I'm often next to a fuel cell car, talking rapidly and sharing my knowledge and what I know about hydrogen mobility and hydrogen in general. In the lower right is the fuel cell car that I currently drive. I was fueling at the Aliso Viejo station on my way down to San Diego about 4 weeks ago for a conference with CCCA. I affectionately refer to my car as Sharky. But that said, one of the things in my job that I did then and I do now is, because of my background in news media relations, I track news clips, oftentimes solely just for the organization that I work for. But oftentimes, well, not often, sometimes I'm allowed to track industry news. And so I've been tracking hydrogen industry news since 2012, from a time when you would hear about one fuel cell bus coming to a community and you thought, wow, that's amazing. Where today that's like, yeah, whatever. Where we now hear about buses being purchased in the amounts of 20 buses or more. We're now hearing about projects here in California to bring 1,000 fuel cell buses to various agencies across the state. But that kind of news surveillance or industry surveillance has really helped inform what I'm about to share with you. To tell you just a little bit more about me, on the environmental side, I'm a California native plant gardener, so much so that I refer to myself as a native plant zealot, but I throw seeds, not stones. To the right, obviously, some of you who know California natives know that's a Matilaha poppy, which is the grand dame of California wildflowers. To the left is a a wreath I put together from various plants in my yard, including toyon, various sages, both toyon, with the red berries, and toyon with the gold berries, appropriately named Davis Gold. So that's kind of how I express my environmentalism, among other ways. So just to set kind of some foundations for what I'm about to say, I'm not an engineer, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a researcher. So with your questions, I just ask that you be gentle with me. If some of you, I'm sure, given kind of the history of doing these kinds of things, some of you may have highly technical questions. I may not be able to answer them, but hopefully I can connect you up with a resource that helps you understand a subject matter better. I'm not just going to talk about mobility, but to really kind of hone in on mobility for a second. Electric vehicles come in two flavors, battery and fuel cell. If you talk to a lot of people on the hydrogen community, increasingly beyond that, there's a viewpoint that we're going to need both technologies, that they complement each other, and that in fact, these technologies may excel in a particular vehicle category, but not to the exclusion of another. Sadly, sometimes I've been forced into conversations that I like to call electric vehicle deathmatch conversations that's fueled by, I think, a mistaken belief that there can only be one true zero-emission technology. So I like to jokingly call it EV deathmatch conversations. And then lastly, I come from an attitude of we need all the tools in the decarbonization toolbox, including batteries and fuel cells. So hydrogen, why are we talking about it now? Why is it so visible in the last 2 to 3 years? And to give you some perspective, like I said, I've been kind of tracking these issues for the last 11 years. And around 2016, 2017, we started to see this sort of uptick in activity. And in fact, to the point that we thought 2020 is going to be our year. I mean, that was when the Tokyo Olympics were supposed to happen. I'll also kind of talk about RE Plus at the time. I wasn't a staff member then, but I was at their Salt Lake City conference. And the Fuel Cell Partnership did one of the first sessions in the show. Gates opened, everybody came in. We had a seminar on electrolyzers. And within 10 minutes, we had 90 people. We were a little shocked because prior to that, many of the people attending these kinds of programs were typical hydrogen folks. We knew everybody in the community. And that particular session, probably 80 to 90% of the people in attendance we didn't recognize. And that was the first indicator that the renewables industry was starting to talk about hydrogen and recognize its potential. But really, a couple of the reasons why we're talking about hydrogen today, 2 reasons largely: COVID and all of the resulting energy stimulus packages we started to see around the globe, as well as the invasion of Ukraine. And we're now seeing Europe doing everything that it can to get away from Russian natural gas by reducing usage and also using hydrogen as one of those means to do that. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of those stimulus packages, especially those here in the US, because they are significant and it's making for a very interesting hydrogen landscape, not only here, but globally. So hydrogen sometimes has been described as a Swiss Army knife. To the right is an image that was developed by the US Department of Energy. That image really came out of efforts they had probably about 7 to 8 years ago. They brought together the national labs to pitch, with the labs pitching ideas for what they wanted to pursue. And one of them was really taking hydrogen to scale. And this sort of map gives you a sense a little bit of where hydrogen is in the energy landscape and some of the things that it can do. And I also wanted to let you know, look, I'm going to go through some of these slides really quickly, but these slides will be available afterwards. I'll be available for questions, but some of them I'm going to run through quickly. So if you kind of go, wait, just know you'll be able to see them again. So I also want to put some things in perspective, especially about kind of when we're talking about hydrogen. To me, there seems to be kind of two paradigms, or maybe even two phases of hydrogen. We have the old phase that we're coming out of. Many of you, if you've heard about hydrogen before, heard presentations, a lot of times you're going to hear people say, and rightfully so, most hydrogen today is made from natural gas. That's the way we've made it for a long time. The new paradigm is, as we move forward, is that hydrogen is going to be made a lot of different ways. It's going to be renewable, or it's going to be zero carbon, or very low carbon. But I want to back up for a second, because hydrogen traditionally has been made by companies that we call industrial gas companies. To the right are some of the names of some of these companies, not all of them. But they produce a number of industrial gases, or gases for industry. And they include hydrogen. They include nitrogen. One of the things they also produce, oxygen for hospitals. Many of them have healthcare units. So they're doing things, they don't kind of look like a traditional oil and gas sort of company. So there's a lot of nuance to hydrogen that often gets lost, but I think as people become more educated, I think we're going to see it's a very interesting community, and it's been expanding rapidly. And under this new paradigm, this new phase, we're starting to see policies being developed, carrots and sticks, that are really going to drive us forward. And just to kind of remind you, some of the traditional uses of hydrogen up until today, obviously the space program. Hydrogen has mostly been used to refine petroleum, to desulfurize it. That's why over the years you've heard them referred to as hydrocarbons. We use it to produce fertilizer, processed foods like peanut butter. That hydrogenated oils is or hydrogenated oils. And then also within the space program, not to just lift the rockets off the ground, but also help power fuel cells in space. So a couple quick things about hydrogen. Hydrogen is the first element after the Big Bang, first element that was created. It's the most abundant element in the universe. A lot of times we've talked up until recently about the fact that hydrogen's the most abundant element, but it's always attached to something else, like in water or something else, which is why we need to mine it. We need to crack it out. But there have been some interesting stories lately where here on Earth, we are finding caverns of natural hydrogen where it exists by itself. It's a really amazing discovery. And we're going to be hearing more about it, I think, over the next couple of years. Hydrogen is also the lightest element. So a lot of times, some people will not fully understand hydrogen. They'll say it's highly flammable. They also forget to tell you that it's also 14 times lighter than air. So it disperses very quickly. So when we create, just like with any gas or form of energy, when we create safety systems to address them, to respect these fuels, that's always taken into consideration. It's also non-toxic and non-poisonous. Hydrogen is, and I'm going to move through some of these quickly. Really, the first time we started to hear about hydrogen, it goes back to the 18th century. Jules Verne started to talk about it. He talked about a number of things: solar power, hydrogen power. The first fuel cell was invented in 1838. You started to see in the 20th century hydrogen beginning to emerge slowly but surely. So there's a lot of different ways to make hydrogen. And this list that I'm showing you is partial. There are two traditional methods, or I shouldn't say traditional, but ones that are the most well-known. So when we talk oftentimes about hydrogen made from natural gas, it's using a process called steam methane reformation, which is where you're taking incredibly hot steam and using that to crack the hydrogen, not only out of the natural gas, but the steam itself. That steam method can also be used for biogas or methane that comes off of anaerobic digesters, methane coming off of landfills, methane coming from agricultural waste and such. The other one that we mostly talk about is electrolysis, where you take electricity and split water, getting both renewable hydrogen and not really talked about much, but renewable oxygen. But there's other ways that you can make it as well, or including something called pyrolysis, which is really incredibly high temperatures that are used to pull hydrogen out of things like wood chips, even methane. And some of the output includes not only hydrogen, but char itself, a physical representation of that, of the carbon. I'm going to give you a really quick lesson about fuel cells. And I'm going to give you, because I'm a non-technical person, what I call the 4th grade version. Basically, fuel cells are basically thin wafers stacked together like a loaf of bread. And they come in a variety of sizes, from really small that you may see in the near future that are going to power your phones, power your laptops, all the way up to the size of fuel cells that are the size of small buildings. And depending on how they're constructed and how what kind of fuel goes in them, when we usually talk about mobility, we're talking about hydrogen as well as oxygen being those inputs. So the fuel cells for mobility, and even some power generation, you're injecting hydrogen as well as oxygen. And the fuel cells are designed to take advantage of the really strong attraction between those molecules. And so the output is typically heat, electricity, and potable water. That's one of the reasons why the space program and even the military like fuel cells that utilize hydrogen and oxygen as their inputs. Because when they go out on missions, say these vehicles, they can capture the water that comes out, and that is drinkable water for folks that are out on missions. There are other kinds of fuel cells as well. I won't get into them as much, but there's some really interesting technologies that are out there. And I will give you resources at the end of this presentation that you can go and kind of go down the rabbit hole, so to speak, and learn more about them. So I wanted to pull out for a second. I'm gonna kind of pull out, look at kind of the global side of things, as well as increasingly look at what's going on in California, because, and I'll explain that in a moment. But over the last several years, hydrogen has really started to take on a pace that's beyond anybody's expectations, even hydrogen insiders. Like I said, as you can look on the right, you have the president of the European Union. The EU has been making remarkably aggressive language about hydrogen over the last couple of years. You also have European stakeholders who have aggressively said things like, we want to see hydrogen priced in euros internationally, not US dollars. I don't know if that's going to happen, but when you hear that kind of aggressiveness coming out of European stakeholders, you want to pay attention to those things. At the same time, I've heard Europeans even said, we lost on batteries, we're not going to lose on hydrogen. So the game is on globally. For everyone is kind of positioning, kind of looking for where they're going to be in the hydrogen future. Will we be an export country? Will we be an importer? Will we be an exporter of the technology? So you've got, and you even have, like you see in the lower right, one international expert talking about the fact that hydrogen helps, among other renewable generators, it enables potentially this sort of decentralized sort of approach to energy in a way that we didn't have with petroleum. So it starts to look really interesting, but you're beginning to watch alliances happen, not just on continents, but across continents. And I want to pull back a little bit to here in the United States. The United States, up until recently, was really slow on the uptake, and it was very frustrating to watch Germany, Japan, South Korea, and others. And I'll call out California as being just a little bit different from the US. I think we already know, those of us who live here, California, I often joke that California is the down payment on everybody else's clean air. And when it comes to clean tech and green tech, our level of investment is unparalleled here in the US. But these are a couple of the drivers of renewable, zero carbon and low carbon hydrogen here in the United States. Back in 2021, we had the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, also known as the BIL, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. One of the things that it did was it funded hydrogen hubs, and I'll get back to that in a moment. It also funded electrolyzer development as well as manufacturing, so about $9.5 billion in total. Recently, at the bottom of those list of bullets, the federal government came in and recognizing the fact that they need to synchronize supply and demand, $1 billion to help really drive demand for the hydrogen that's going to be produced through these hubs. Also, we had the Inflation Reduction Act, which created the hydrogen production tax credit. Right now, we're in the middle of the regulations being developed. You've got a lot of disagreement between not just within industry, within the environmental community, and others about how does that production tax credit get implemented. And then at the bottom, really kind of one of the key foundational elements of this is the Department of Energy, or the federal government, has created what they call earth shots, like a moonshot. And one of these earth shots is within 10 years, we're going to get a kilogram of hydrogen produced down to $1. I'm not talking about $1 at the pump, but $1 for production. And then you add on all the additional costs that are required to get it to market. But let's kind of circle back a bit to the hydrogen hub effort. As you can see, when they put out this $8 billion for the development of hydrogen hubs, you've had 79 applicants. In many cases, in some cases, it was groups of states partnering with industry. In some cases, it was industry only. Ultimately, 33 were encouraged to move forward based on their April 7th submission. Right now, they're beginning to have interviews with these 33, or at least some of the 33 applicants, just to kind of clarify items. And in the fall, we're expected to learn of negotiations being moved forward. And you're probably going to see DOE has said out loud, even though the legislation says a minimum of 4, they expect 7 to 10 hubs being approved. On the right, you can see I've listed a number of the hub efforts here in the Western US, including Hawaii. At the top, I've included a basic map from the Clean Air Task Force out of Boston, showing the states that have submitted hydrogen applications. Gosh, there's so much we can talk about in all of this, but to kind of, and like I said, the Clean Air Task Force on the left, they have a map where they're tracking these hubs. You can find them real easily online. At the same time, there's another resource out there by Hydrogen Forward. They've tried to begin listing some of the projects that are out there. And I will tell you, based on the dots that are there, those are some of the projects, not all of them. But they're doing their best, and you can even submit projects if you'd like. And I kind of offer this humorously. What's a hub? It's a very broad definition of what a hub looks like, because you have folks like the state of California applying. Some might call a hub something a little more comfortable, a little bit smaller in geography. But I think DOE has kept it purposefully vague to give the applicants, because if you look at some of these, and I'm going to pull back for a second to a previous slide. If you, we'll use this one, New Mexico, Colorado, Utah, and Wyoming are applying jointly as a hub. They are the WISH, the WISH coalition. That's a very large hub. Texas, they've got private interests applying, the state's supportive. In the Northeast, you have a Northeast hub led by New York. But so when we're talking about hubs, if it feels like it's a fuzzy definition, it is, and it's kind of purposeful. But like I said, game on. So when we produced the hydrogen hub legislation, and just so you know, if you're doing research out and beyond, in Europe, they tend to call them hydrogen valleys. But the hydrogen hub funding kind of got people's attention, like the US is finally waking up. But it was that Inflation Reduction Act, the hydrogen production tax credit, which has sent our allies, the Europeans and the Canadians, into apoplexy. And they are moving to respond in kind with appropriate policies. It's going to be interesting to see if they can. But I often joke, I got my colleagues at RE Plus laughing when I talked about the fact that the Inflation Reduction Act and the hydrogen elements of it created a, to quote Ross Perot, a giant sucking sound coming out of the United States, sucking up investment dollars from Europe, Canada, and other places. To the left is a French think tank, which just came out with this paper looking at the IRA and their predictions. But I will tell you this, the Europeans are being aggressive. They do not want to lose. When you start to see things like France and Germany holding hands jointly on projects, you know they're serious. And to give you an idea of what's going on with all of this recent legislation, so Cummins, which is known globally for engines, combustion engines, about 3 or 4 years ago, they acquired a company called Hydrogenics out of Canada. They just completed full acquisition of it. One of their partners was a company, Air Liquide, that owned 19% of it, but they fully acquired it. They've renamed all of their renewables related products under the brand of Accelera by Hydrogen. But look at this. They've received orders for 300 megawatts of electrolyzer projects in North America. And just so you know, some people will say hydrogen hype is going on. Those are the folks that haven't really been paying attention well. There's probably some hype in all of this. It's no surprise we're the new shiny bauble on the renewables Christmas tree. But the acceleration of electrolyzer projects began back in 2018. We were already beginning to see that then, and some really big purchases. So, but just what we're seeing now even goes beyond what we had anticipated. And again, just kind of further emphasis, and just so you know, there's so much going on. I'm giving you snapshots or little spritzes of what's happening. But like I said, to the left, you can see left that photo. In the middle is Kadri Simpson, the EU's energy commissioner, who in a very thoughtful and nice tone has, like I said, they're being aggressive. They've said some really aggressive things. And right there, she's meeting with Portugal, Spain, France, and Germany for about how they're going to move hydrogen through pipelines throughout Europe. We're going to see even more so. Let's see what this next slide brings us. We're going to see, so hydrogen around the world, we're going to see Spain and Portugal. A lot of sun, they're just like California. We're going to see a lot happening. Japan just updated its national hydrogen strategy. They were the first in 2016. Germany just cut an agreement with South Africa, as they have with others. Germany has said out loud, they know they can't make all their own hydrogen, but they want to own the technology. And so they're going to be working with partners around the world to make hydrogen using German-made technology. And it's not just Spain and Portugal, the southern side of Europe. They will be looking to the MENA region, Middle East and North Africa. Japan has been scouring the globe for hydrogen because, remember, Japan and South Korea don't have a lot of land. They don't have a lot of room for solar and wind. So they're going to be looking at Australia. They're going to be looking at the Pacific Rim to really help them move hydrogen around. And just to the right, just to kind of get your curiosity, one company just announced, and they've been working on this for a while, you know, wind's going to be used to help us make hydrogen, but we're now talking about making that hydrogen on site. And so we're beginning to see the first project internationally happen. And we're going to pull back a little bit, back to the United States, back to North America, back to really the North American West Coast. Over the last 10 years, increasingly California, Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia have had, if not identical policies, increasingly aligning policies. California's been drafting a lot of memoranda of cooperation or understanding at times. They did one jointly several months ago. This particular signing ceremony, by the way, took place the same day that California launched its Hydrogen Hub effort. Sometimes you just can't coordinate separate days for separate key events. But this alliance, this kind of West Coast alliance is going to be key because the 5 really connects us all. And it's going to be a key way of not just moving commerce, but moving hydrogen in the early years. So let's pull back a little bit more into California. There's a lot going on in terms of hydrogen production, a lot of projects that have been funded. In the middle, we'll start off with Antelope Valley in northern Los Angeles County. For those of you who are not familiar, it's the high desert. The high desert across Southern California, including not just Antelope Valley, but Victor Valley, as well as the Mojave, are going to be key areas for producing hydrogen. The city of Lancaster, about 2 years ago, declared itself the first hydrogen city in the United States. They've got several projects already in active development. One of their projects they've had a demonstration is a company called Heliogen. They come out of Idea Labs in Pasadena, which has given birth to a number of startup companies. Heliogen does the mirrored sort of approach to solar, except they have thousands of tiny mirrors that are all controlled individually that track the sun as they go. And so they use that to produce very hot temperatures and to not only potentially produce steam, producing electricity, but also taking some of that heat and driving it underground into facilities filled with rock or cement. So that heat gets trapped, and so it becomes a 24-hour facility. That's just one of those projects. To the left, we have a number of projects that are, and again, like I said, electrolysis is not the only way we're going to make hydrogen. We're going to make hydrogen using pyrolysis. We're going to use hydrogen using that same steam methane reformation process we use for natural gas. We can even use that methane, that renewable methane, as some would call it, biogas, renewable natural gas, that can be used in something called a tri-generation fuel cell, or tri as in three. That was developed out of UC Irvine and tested at the Orange County Sanitation District in Fullerton, California, back in 2010 to 2012. And basically you're injecting that methane into a stationary fuel cell, which traditionally produces heat and electricity, but UC Irvine kind of rejiggered it to produce both heat, electricity, and hydrogen. And so the first commercial product of that is now being developed at the Port of Long Beach to fuel trucks. Down below, I also want to point out, because a lot of times the water issue is brought up when it comes to hydrogen, Plug Power, which has been known for, initially known for producing fuel cell forklifts. Right now, we've got about 60,000 fuel cell forklifts operating across the United States. About 1/3 of all food in the US is touched by these forklifts. But they have begun, they use more hydrogen right now than NASA does. And they are in the process of developing several hydrogen or solar to hydrogen plants across the US. They are building one in Fresno County in the heart of our Central Valley. They're using degraded agricultural land, and they are actually building a water reclamation plant that they will jointly share with the city of Mendota. So when it comes to the water issue, don't be surprised if you start to see a lot more creative activities. It's not just desal, it's there are other methods of doing this. And then to the right, a company called Raven SR, they're using a technology that was developed in the 80s, they've updated it, and basically they go into landfills and they make hydrogen. And it's a very clean way of making hydrogen, and I'm really excited to see this. I'm sorry, I muted myself for a moment. So here in California, when we talk about hubs, like I said, they're these big fuzzy definitions. And we are now beginning to see the emergence of what I might call mini hubs, or really kind of true hubs in various communities across the state. And I'm going to switch over to the next page for a second, because here in California, we're starting to see a number emerge. And I'm going to get back to Bakersfield and Kern County to give you an idea of what's going on. But we're starting to see the Shasta region, the Redding region. They've got a lot of good attributes, low energy costs. They've got a lot of wood chips. We have a lot of dying trees. They have a lot of sun, surprisingly, more sun than a lot of areas across the US. And also the Redding area is key for mobility, because that is the entry point from California into the Pacific Northwest. Up on the Redwood Coast near Humboldt, the US just recently approved 2 offshore wind areas, one off of Morro Bay in the Central Coast and one off of Humboldt. The Redwood Coast is also an isolated community, and hydrogen becomes a really interesting proposition for communities that need resiliency, that need to store energy beyond batteries. Batteries are going to be a key component of energy storage, but they have a limited amount of time. And hydrogen, if you store it properly, you can store it seasonally for long periods of time. And I'll be talking a little bit more about that storage issue more so. San Joaquin Valley, like I said, the Bakersfield area, we're going to start seeing it in the Fresno area, actually all throughout the Central Valley. Remember, we're producing a lot of agriculture, and there's a lot of agricultural waste, a lot of kind of methane, and also you've got dairy farms. Central Coast, San Luis Obispo, like I said, offshore wind, and like I already said, those high deserts here in the state of California. But let's go back for a second to Bakersfield, Kern County. Just over the last 2 years, a number of projects have been announced. I'm going to point out a couple of them. One of them is, and we're going to talk more about buses, but Golden Empire Transit, which is based in Kern County, just launched with fuel cell buses. We're going to talk a little bit more about why they're the canaries in the coal mine, why transit is really showing the way forward. I really want to talk for a moment down below about that photo of that truck. That is a Ford F-50. And we'll talk a little bit more about them as we get into mobility, but there's going to be a project between SoCal Gas and Ford for the use of a utility truck. As vehicles start to get larger and heavier, hydrogen starts to become more optimal in some cases than batteries. In some cases, this sort of middle ground of medium duty, I think you're going to see both, but a lot is happening in the Bakersfield, Kern area, and this is just some of it. So hydrogen is energy storage. So right now in the US, one of the ways you can do storage of energy at the level of terawatts, and I would even add petawatts, is hydrogen in salt caverns. You can take that hydrogen that you make, store it underground, and retrieve it as you need it. It's already being done in Texas by a company called Air Liquide. Again, it's one of those industrial gas companies we talked about. All of these companies are global in nature. They built the first cavern, and we have salt caverns across the Midwest and even parts of the West, like in Utah. So we're going to kind of screech to the left of this screen. There is a project, many of you have probably heard about. The city of Los Angeles is going to be using hydrogen to help power the city and to replace its Intermountain project based in Utah, where they're using coal. The hydrogen that they're going to be using is coming from the ACES project, which is nearby. They are building, I shouldn't say building, they are taking salt caverns, developing them. They will be the size of the Empire State Building to store hydrogen and to be used to power the gas turbines that are being developed by Mitsubishi Power System that will in turn ultimately power the city of Los Angeles, where I live, as well as other cities across the West. You've also got some other interesting opportunities with hydrogen storage, because right now, one of the other methods is we just store them in tanks, and these tanks oftentimes are big, they're heavy. One of these, and I've called it a holy grail over the years, and I didn't think it would come to market as fast as it would, but the search has been on for some time to find a medium that can store hydrogen at ambient pressure, at the pressure we all live in, and even to some degree ambient temperature. And they've increasingly been talking about metal hydrides, and we're now beginning to see the emergence of these companies. One company called GKN, they just had their, they opened their US headquarters in, I believe it's Carlsbad. It's either that or Oceanside. I'm fairly certain it's Carlsbad just a few months ago. They've got a project that they're developing up in Victor Valley. So it's going to be interesting to see the data that comes out of that. We're also seeing a few other companies come forward where you can really store a lot of hydrogen in very small spaces. So just like when we talk about any other kind of technology, hydrogen and fuel cell related technologies exist in this same universe of continuous improvement. So there's a lot going on that's in the labs. Like I visited, for example, Caltech and their Resnick labs. Some of you may know the Resnick family. They own Palm Wonderful. And they also operate a lot of almond orchards as well. But they have funded the Resnick Center at Caltech, and they are working on artificial photosynthesis, bringing together chemical engineers, PhDs in biology who specialize in photosynthesis. It's a mind-boggling tour and experience, and there's a lot to learn. I've also included on this page to the right, I'm not sure why I did this, but oftentimes this energy storage is also needed for backup power generation. When we talk about those data centers used by companies, including Google, Microsoft, and what, they're increasingly exploring both hydrogen and fuel cells to power them. Many of them right now have these huge diesel generators they rarely use. They have to turn them on every couple of months just to make sure they work. But increasingly, we're seeing fuel cells being used to power them, hydrogen being the source, or some sort of biogas. Sometimes they co-locate with facilities like sanitation districts and other things where they can really easily capture that. But to the right is an example of, we've got Honda, we've got other companies that are taking the fuel cells that they are using for their vehicles and beginning to sell them, market them in other ways that go well beyond mobility. So now we get to the mobility side of the equation. I thought I'd just kind of catch your attention with a number of photos. I would say nearly all but 3 of these photos relate to California. In the upper right, what you're looking at is a racing truck from a company called, it's a French name, so I'm just going to give it my good old US American accent, Gaussen. This racing truck participated in the Dakar North America race. If you kind of look at it just a little bit, I know it's probably hard to see, it looks like a cross between a Mad Max movie and Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, except it just needs a few more sequins or high heels to really complement what's there. But it did make a tour over the last year here in California. It showed up in the Long Beach area for a conference back in a year ago, March a year ago. In the middle, there's a van right now, and I'll talk a little bit more about it, but that's sort of, as I talk about the light duty market, there are also light duty vans that are emerging right now. They're coming out of Europe. That's a van that's made by Stellantis. Some of you may recall that Stellantis is the merger of Chrysler Fiat and the PSA Group. You may know them by one of their brands, Peugeot. And right above that van, that's a mining truck, and it looks like a Tonka toy, but that is a really, really big vehicle. And there is a company out of the state of Washington called First Mode that developed it for the mining company Anglo-American. That mining truck is now in South Africa. Anglo-American is pursuing fuel cell or hydrogen mining trucks to replace all of their fleets. But the rest of these projects I'm going to talk a little bit about in the next couple of pages, but I wanted to kind of point those out. So cars, a lot of times you'll hear nowadays, well, battery electrics is one. The entire light duty market is going to go just to battery electrics. Like I said, it's not or, it's and. If you look at a recent analysis in 2020 out of the California Resources Board, they decided to kind of look at what does a full fleet, or what does it look like to convert all cars in California, the light duty segment, to zero emission vehicles. And by their calculations, they were like, we're going to need both. It's going to be the battery electrics are going to excel in this category. Probably 75 to 80% of the cars are going to be battery electrics, and probably 20 to 25% will be fuel cell electrics. And these are some of the vehicles Actually, these are the vehicles that are on the road today, or I should say most of them that you see are on the road today. So to the left, both of the Toyota cars. On top is the second generation Toyota Mirai. Below it, the first generation Mirai. Many of those first generation Mirais were leased, probably about 96% of them, and many of them have come back on the market as pre-owned. And there have been some really great deals for them. Up top in the middle is the Hyundai Nexo. I got to drive that for about a year. In the middle, BMW right now is taking this car on the road for show. They're rolling out some this year, but they expect to be fully rolling out the vehicle, commercially speaking, in 2025. Down below, you see that to the left, you have the Honda Clarity, that red car. I got to drive one of those for about a year. Great car. To the right, they have concluded production of the Honda Clarity, and they announced that they are bringing to market a fuel cell car in 2024, but this car is different. It's a plug-in fuel cell. So to give you kind of an idea of how a fuel cell car works. So first off, you're going to go to a gas station that has a hydrogen pump. So in the lower right, when we're talking about hydrogen stations, we are talking about hydrogen pumps and equipment at existing gas stations. Because you're filling up in about 3 to 7 minutes, your fueling experience matches kind of the dynamics that you have with a gasoline car, and it matches the business and operational case for those gas station owners. So hydrogen becomes this interesting on-ramp to the green highway for them. So basically, you're going to go to your hydrogen pump in Orange County right now. We've only got 2 stations. It's a long story, but the priority areas were usually, to begin with, LA, Orange County, and the Bay Area. And increasingly, Sacramento and San Diego are demanding more stations, as they rightfully should. Right now, you've got a station, one of the new generations, the next generation stations in Mission Valley, and you've got one up in Carmel Valley, right where the 5, and I think it's the 53 intersect. It's at a Shell station there, as I recall. But you're going to go to that station. You're going to fill up in about 3 to 7 minutes, and that hydrogen is going to get injected from the tank. We're going to pull oxygen out of the air. We're going to filter that, and we're going to inject that into the fuel cell stack. And that's going to really generate the power for your motor. Any excess energy off that fuel cell or the braking systems is going to go back into a small battery on the backside of that vehicle. And that battery really is a helper battery. It's going to help even out the flow of that electricity to the fuel cell. Now, here's the thing with the Honda CR-V that's coming to market. And by the way, that photo I'm showing you is of a current CR-V. They don't have any photos right now of what the new car will look like. We'll begin to see that maybe late this year, early next year. But this one's going to be a plug-in fuel cell. So Mercedes-Benz had also toyed with this a couple of years ago as well. So basically, in recognition of the fact that the fueling and even the charging networks are not going to be robust for a long time. They're evolving, they're moving along. But in some cases with hydrogen, there may be episodes where you're like, my station's gone down. I'm in a 1-station town. I'm in a 1-station neighborhood, but I can plug in my car just like a plug-in hybrid, and I can get 20 to 30 miles directly off of that fuel cell. So they're really kind of taking that battery to the next level and really allowing consumers to optimize both options they have on that car. I will also add that you can see on the right, Rolls-Royce is talking about bringing fuel cell cars to market. There are others as well, and I'm going to show you a few of them. But just to put in perspective for you, no light-duty automaker has walked away from the fuel cell technology, no matter how much they have talked about their commitment to battery electrics, and that is real. It doesn't mean that they've walked away from fuel cells. It just means they haven't made a decision yet, and they continue to work on the technology. So for example, Volkswagen, they talk up until recently, they've really talked, we're going to do battery electrics. Well, last year in Europe, they submitted a very significant fuel cell patent. And it was significant enough for the industry group there, Hydrogen Europe, to crow about it on LinkedIn and other platforms. So just remember in the back, as you kind of, when people tell you, oh, it's all done and over, it's like, no, it's not. So let's go to the next slide. And we're now beginning to see the emergence of fleets of light duty vehicles. Most of these are in Europe. We have one fleet in France called EEP, not Hype, but EEP, and they will have a significant number of taxis that are ready and available for the 2024 Paris Olympics. And there are taxi fleets emerging all across Europe. We haven't started to see that in the US yet. We're starting to see it up in British Columbia. There is one company that is doing deliveries and expanding, and hopefully their clients have said they want them in California. A lot of people talk about the fact that fuel cell cars aren't all that sexy, and it's understandable. Even though the recent design, the fuel cell, the Toyota Mirai is very pretty. The racing category, my estimation is that the racing category is where the sexy is going to be for fuel cell vehicles. So what you're looking at are, so for example, Toyota in the middle, they are currently racing a Corolla. It's a combustion engine Corolla. On the right is a racing car concept they recently unveiled. In the lower right, that's the Hopium Machina. That comes out of France, and that is a company, Hopium is a company founded by French race car driver Olivier Lombard. You can't get more French or Southern European with that name. And in the middle, you've got the racing truck I was talking to you about. To the lower left, that is the Hyperion XP1. This is a company based out of Orange County. There's been a lot of hullabaloo about it. They've said they're only going to make about 300 of them and then move on to another vehicle. They are building their factory in Columbus, Ohio. On top, the Hyundai Envision 74 concept. I have no idea what any of those words mean, but they unveiled it in France recently. It's kind of caught the online car community. Everyone's gotten really excited about it, but just know you're starting to see the racing community come forward. Le Mans is going to open a hydrogen category in 2026. They've been pushing it back every once in a while, but 2026, I think we're going to be good to go. The Andretti family of race car royalty fame is getting into hydrogen as well. But the racing category is really starting to step up, and I think it bodes well for that light duty category. So transit buses can be really boring sometimes, but I'll tell you, in this particular case, when it comes to mobility, when it comes to the heavy duty category, when it comes to fleets, transit buses are the canaries in the coal mine, because they are really showing us the benefits and the challenges of both battery electric and fuel cell electric vehicle. And here in California, as always, like I said, we are the leaders. We are the down payment on everybody else's clean air in the US. We have a number of transit agencies that have been leaders. One of them is Sunline Transit out in Coachella Valley in the Palm Springs area. Another one is AC Transit out of the Oakland area, out of the San Francisco East Bay. And I picked this photo because if you notice, this is an AC Transit bus in Reno, Nevada, which means this bus had to go up and over the Donner Pass at an incline like this. And they did that for a transit conference that was taking place there about 3-4 years ago. And they're using one of their older fuel cells, which is much larger than the new ones that they have, because they kind of figured out they needed a smaller fuel cell stack just to really deal with their service area in the San Francisco East Bay. But with these older fuel cell stacks, which were much larger, they went up and over the Donner Pass during a snow flurry. So not only in inclement weather, but they also did it in extreme temperatures, and fuel cells are noted for that. Like I also said, we've had fuel cell buses that have been operating out in Palm Springs or Coachella Valley for 20 years now, day in and day out. So they are well adapted to extreme temperatures. That's why I also added in this story, this recent story coming out of Mercedes-Benz, or really the Daimler Corporation, as they tested their buses going over an Alpine Pass. Here in California, and this is going on across the country first as well, but we're the early adopters, and it's now spreading really quickly. We have a lot of agencies that are beginning to look at fuel cells in a way they never have. And the reason is California requires that every transit agency develop a rollout plan, that they plan for not a few buses, but for their entire fleet. And what does that rollout look like? Because up until recently, transit agencies were just buying a few buses. And no surprise, battery electric buses are cheaper. And they bought 5 buses, they bought 5 chargers, and they're like, we're going battery electric. Well, as they began to develop these plans and talk to utilities and look at what a full rollout looks like, they were gobsmacked by the cost and the complexity. And as a result, many agencies in California have started to take a second look at fuel cell electric buses. And that doesn't mean to just drop battery electrics and go to another technology, but to look at what does a mixed fleet look like. And as you begin to see these rollout plans, and many have already been delivered to CARB, and you can find them online fairly easily, you're starting to see a mixed approach. Yeah, and also, so that's why the California transit agencies are really the canaries in the coal mine. They're beginning to show what's happening. Here in Los Angeles County, in the San Gabriel Valley, which includes Pasadena, for those that are not as readily familiar with our geography here. One transit agency, Foothill Transit, over the last 2 years, ordered 33 fuel cell buses. They recently ordered an additional 19. And those transit buses are now on the road operating. But we're going to see a mix. And that's why, when I say it's not either or, it's not or, it's and. And then to the right, a very significant study is being conducted with AC Transit by Stanford University, their Precourt Institute. And this study is affectionately called, or informally called, the 5x5 study, because what they set out to do was, because their board needed to know, they had a plan. We're going to do 70% battery electrics and 30% fuel cell electrics, but we really want to understand the technology and what does the data say. So what they did was they took 5 fuel cell buses from a company called New Flyer, 5 battery electric buses from the same company. It's the same model vehicle, just different drivetrains, 5x5. And then they said, you know what? We're going to take 5 of our legacy fuel cell buses, the older ones that we have. We're going to include them. We're going to include 5 of our diesel buses and 5 of our diesel hybrid buses. So to date, they have produced 4 volumes of a 6-volume study. And based on just the first volume alone, AC Transit flipped its percentages. They're going to pursue 70% fuel cell, 30% battery electric. And the data that's being collected, Stanford University Precourt Institute is going to be developing an online tool that will enable transit agencies across the globe to utilize that data to really kind of help them understand what their needs are and what they can do with this. So this, keep an eye on this study, because I believe it has implications, not just for buses. Buses are the early adopters in the heavy duty category. They've really paved the way, and I know I keep using all of these kind of transportation related phrases, but they have really paved the way for heavy duty trucking and others. Because remember, buses, unlike light duty vehicles, buses are a fleet. They have a very specific duty cycle. They are highly predictable. And trucking is almost the same way as well. And so the work that was done really testing out those fuel cell stacks was critically important. And so right now, what we're seeing in the heavy duty realm is a number of companies that have come to market or coming to market. And what's happening is, we didn't have to test the technology. It's really about tweaking it and making sure it works with these particular platforms. So this gives you some idea of what's going on. You have the major players. Toyota is partnering with Kenworth. They got their entire drivetrain approved by CARB as a zero-emission drivetrain. So now they can sell this to any truck manufacturer that wants to. You have on the right, you have Hyundai. They are utilizing they are building their own trucks, the Exient trucks. They've got an incredibly interesting project that's happening out of the Port of Oakland. They're going to start this really soon. Sometime by the end of this year, they should be 30 fuel cell trucks that are operating. It's going to be probably, I think, the largest fleet in the world, or at least the largest fleet in North America. In the middle, you've got a Hyzon truck. You've got towards the lower right, a Nikola motor truck. Nikola is a unique company in that they are not only pursuing truck development, but station development. So when you lease or purchase their cars, you get the fuel included in the package. Others aren't doing it that way. Everybody's kind of coming to market slightly differently. Some are doing onboard gaseous storage, and increasingly you're probably going to see onboard liquid storage because it enables them to store more hydrogen, giving them a longer range. At the very bottom of the screen, you see a blue truck. That is Cummins, their H2 rescue truck that they developed with the Department of Defense, Energy, and FEMA. This is basically a mobile, almost like a nano grid. It's an emergency vehicle. It can go about 180 miles on a tank of hydrogen and provide backup power for about 72 hours. And in fact, if you really think about fuel cell electric vehicles, and in fact, AC Transit tested this with the Center for Transportation and the Environment, looking at transit buses as backup power stations. And I can go on and on about this, and we can talk about this more probably in the Q&A. More mobility, trains really are having their day. We've got the first train operating here in the US, here in California, in the San Bernardino or Inland Empire area, which is about 50, 60 miles east of Los Angeles. We're going to have a train project there, the San Bernardino County Transportation Authority or Agency. We've got a project funded up in Northern California, the Sacramento area. They just acquired several more fuel cell trains that they're going to be developing. We have a project that's going to link a rail project that's going to link the Central Valley into the southern end of the Bay Area and connect to the BART system. And they're going to be developing renewable hydrogen. They're going to be working with a company called Linde. And you've got major companies that are entering this realm, and rail has, and California actually recently, when they acquired or purchased that train for the San Bernardino community, the California State Transportation Agency, or CalSTA, negotiated a purchase agreement with Stadler out of Europe. They negotiated an agreement to purchase 4 trains with an option to buy 20 more. So just so you can see kind of what's already starting to happen behind the scenes. Even more mobility, like I showed you on the right, we're going to have, we should have had the first fuel cell ferry in the world operating in the San Francisco Bay Area. Apparently it's getting ready to launch in August. Fascinating story behind it, but I don't have time to tell you. In the middle, I was already talking to you about the mining truck. On the maritime side, we're starting to see a lot of activity here and around the globe. I will also note that San Diego is going to get a hydrogen research vessel that is being developed for the Scripps Institute. So that's going to be absolutely fascinating to watch as they develop it.
Excuse me, Keith, for interrupting, but I hope that we can wrap this up so we have some time for Q&A, because people are anxious to do that.
I am quite sure I have triggered everyone. And here's a couple of links. I'm ready to talk. So Mary and I'm going to stop. Do you want me to stop sharing my slides, or you want me to keep them up?
I think it would be better to, well, give them a second to get the links down, but then when we do the Q&A, we'll probably stop sharing.
Okay. So, but I'm happy to start taking questions, whatever you'd like.
Merrill, would you mind beginning with an introduction and then showing Mark Jacobson's video?
Absolutely. I'm going to go ahead and close out. There we go. And
Apologies for talking so much, everyone.
no worries. Here we go, Joe.
Well, before I go on and kind of synthesizing the system, we hear a lot about hydrogen. So I want to just say, in my opinion, what are the good and bad sources and uses of hydrogen? Well, the only good source of hydrogen, in my mind, is green hydrogen, which is hydrogen produced by electrolysis, where the electricity comes from just wind, water, and solar. Not good is gray or blue hydrogen, which is from natural gas without and with carbon capture, respectively, or black and brown hydrogen, which from coal, or pink hydrogen from nuclear electricity, or turquoise hydrogen, which is also from natural gas. For uses, good uses are for long distance transport, such as long distance aircraft, ships, trains, trucks, military vehicles, using fuel cells, so not combusting the hydrogen. Also in industry, certain industries such as ammonia and steel manufacturing, and for both electricity and heat with fuel cells in remote microgrids, and in some cases, grid electricity. But for most grid electricity, batteries are more efficient and actually cost less per unit discharge of electricity compared with fuel cells. But we've been doing studies on this, and we find that batteries are generally better for grid electricity. There's some cases where using batteries plus fuel cells are useful for grid electricity. But there's never a case, or hardly ever a case, when just fuel cells and no batteries are useful. Bad uses of hydrogen, all other transports, vehicle transport, such as passenger vehicle transport, heating buildings is not useful, and burning hydrogen, as I mentioned, and most cases for grid electricity.
So thank you, Keith. It was just an eye-opening presentation, but just to begin the questions, Mark Jacobson, in his book, No Miracles Needed, addresses what he just summarized from a webinar built on his research in his book. And basically what it seems to me to be saying is hydrogen through electrolysis from water makes sense. Others don't make sense because they perpetuate fossil or nuclear fuels, and some fossil fuel companies are, I think, probably in their planning, thinking of hydrogen based on natural gas and so forth as a way to extend the life of their business model, but in the process, putting more carbon and nasties into our atmosphere and further warming our planet. So what are your thoughts about that, please?
Couple things. Mr. Jacobson is known for a particular study that he did with Cornell, which has received some eye rolling and criticism within the hydrogen community, and even one environmental group, Clean Air Task Force out of Boston, I know I've mentioned them before, actually didn't think that study merited inclusion in the development of public policy. Happy to share that statement with you at some point. But that said, you know,
your sound has gotten very, very soft.
Has it? My apologies. I'll try and talk louder, but I know sometimes I have odd connection issues, even though I'm using an actual line, not using Wi-Fi in my house. Am I okay now?
Yeah, better. Thank you.
I think the general consensus, I think it's a tough question. I think we're in the middle of a transition. I think you're going to see some companies that are going to want to stick to hydrogen from natural gas. They do know where the world is going. I think they're going to attempt carbon capture. I think there are companies to look at, especially those doing methane pyrolysis. You know, having been in this job, I think if you look at the vast majority of projects, they tend to be renewable. And oftentimes, yeah, you know, it's interesting to watch even within the hydrogen community, those who are like renewable only. There are those that are saying renewable and zero carbon and low carbon. And there are some that say we need a mix of all, or we need the ability to transition. So it's an interesting argument even within the hydrogen community. It's a really complex one, and I think there are others that could probably talk about it better than I could.
Okay, well, thanks so much. Janice?
Hi, yeah, I've been trying to follow the chat. There's a lot happening there, but the very first question that came in was regarding school buses. And then there were subsequent comments about about busing in general. For example, the North County Transit District, Jay Posted, has put a lot of money toward hydrogen buses and so forth. But the very first question is regarding school buses.
You know, there seems to be, what I've seen is a general consensus that probably those school buses are going to, because of their duty cycles, will probably be battery electric. But like I've said previously, while I think technologies will excel in particular categories and situations, it's not to the exclusion of the other. But I suspect you're mostly going to see battery electrics, and I can see them being heavily used in vehicle to grid situations. If they're not being utilized throughout the day, but only at certain times, I think it's going to be really interesting to see how they kind of evolve in that sort of an ecosystem. It's possible you could see some fuel cell ones. It really depends. It could be you have extreme temperature issues in some areas. It depends on the length of the route, any number of criteria. So.
Thank you.
Thank you. Vista actually has a variety of multiple battery electric school buses, I think 18 or some number like that, maybe more now. But the North County Transit District, as Janice just said, received a grant for $29 million for 23 fuel cell buses and plans to have 50 or so hydrogen buses. What struck me when I read about this grant was that it's 23 buses for $29 million. Do these things really cost north of $1 million each?
At this time, we've already seen cost reductions go like this, but remember, different timelines for different categories. Battery electric's much more ahead. In some cases, they're cheaper in some ways, like the buses themselves. But also fuel cell electrics, right now, you have probably at most 100, 150 operating across the US. So it's no surprise that you see a cost like that. At one point, New Flyer, which is the largest manufacturer of buses in North America, at one point had done some calculations and said, if we were starting to do production runs about 100 buses or more, we will see those costs dipping well below $1 million each. So it's, to me, this is early market. So it's no surprise that an early market is acting like an early market.
Okay, thanks. Janice?
Kelly had a question about the different uses for hydrogen, which you did speak to, and how to determine which ones are appropriate. She references the clean hydrogen ladder and says that shows that many applications are uncompetitive.
Yeah, Michael Liebrick put that together, and it's usually a collective eye roll within the hydrogen community. I hate to keep saying it that way, but that said, there are, like I've said, there are some areas in which, like I said, with light duty vehicles, battery electrics are going to excel. They're going to dominate. But I think to completely shut out a technology at this time, I don't think that's the best thing to be doing, because battery electrics can't do it all. Let's take light duty, because on Michael Liebrick's ladder, right now, for long distances, for super commuters, for people in extreme temperatures, for people who live in multi-unit housing, fuel cell electric vehicles become an easy option. I remember talking to a colleague of mine from Southern California, Edison. He drives a fuel cell car, and I looked at him, I'm like, weren't you shivved in the back by your colleagues? And he goes, no, I live in downtown LA. I live in an apartment. We don't have that kind of accommodation for charging. Now you're beginning to see, for example, in San Francisco, they now mandate that all new buildings have to be wired to ensure that charging can take place for everyone. But you even have single family homes that are not well. I had another one from the Department of Water and Power here in Los Angeles. He owns a single family dwelling. To install charging for him, it would have been cost prohibitive. So there are going to be some circumstances where hydrogen will play a role. And there are other times where, and let's also remember a couple of things as we look at technologies, because a lot of times used against hydrogen is what one of my colleagues out of Canada calls the gospel of efficiency. It's not just about efficiency, it's also about total cost of ownership. And I mean total cost of ownership. It's also about utility, or what works. It's also about productivity, and it's certainly about resiliency. It oftentimes feels like, let's put all of our eggs in one basket.
Great, thanks much. I would like to turn to a few comments from the Australian mining business. They have compared hydrogen and battery electric and have decided that battery electric is by far the best way to go because of efficiency. Quote, using hydrogen as an example, we see the greatest losses at the fuel to tank stage due to generation, storage, and transportation compared with minimal losses in electricity generation and transmission. And electric trucks demonstrate an overall efficiency of around 80%, while hydrogen and diesel show about 30 and 20% respectively. And, you know, continuing, they go on to say, hydrogen, the hype about hydrogen in Australia is beginning to fade. And using hydrogen would require 3 times the amount of electricity. And finally, in the world of cars and trucks, any cars and trucks, battery electric is simply the smartest, cheapest way to go. That's the Australian view. And just one more comment, then I'd like to hear your thoughts. The Netherlands had a recent subsidy round for hydrogen trucks and received 0 applications. As of February 2023, there were 27 hydrogen trucks and over 400 electric trucks in the Netherlands. So, you know, Australia and the Netherlands seem to be saying electric is superior from an efficiency and cost perspective as compared to hydrogen. What are your reactions to that?
About that?
Yeah.
Like I said, transit agencies are the canaries in the coal mine. And I will tell you, it will be interesting to watch. Let them implement those electric trucks, and they may have the circumstances that allows them to do that. But what I usually find, like on one of my slides, the North American Council on Freight Efficiency was talking battery electric, and over the last couple of years, their minds have been changed. And in fact, their last report that I referenced, they came out and said, we kind of made a couple of mistakes and we need both. I would also add in the Netherlands, the Port of Rotterdam, going gung-ho on hydrogen. So it could be, for example, remember the Netherlands is a very small country. What's it the size of? Maybe San Diego County, maybe even smaller. So the duty cycles, the routes on that work very well. But again, they use this gospel of efficiency as though that's the only criterion. And also that particular, like when they do these grant funding opportunities, sometimes if they don't have the right criteria, the right funding for it, no one applies. It's a waste of time. So it could be any number of circumstances, and it could very well be maybe those Australian mining trucks will do well, but most of the heavy duty realm would disagree.
Interesting. Janice?
And it's to say not to the exclusion of battery electrics, but I find that really, yeah, I would like to see them implement that, given what they've said. Because we see a lot of people come back and they are sober in their assessment.
Okay. Janice?
I think that question and answer addressed a lot of the comments that were in the chat. There is one that I want to make sure we get to before we have to close, and that is the percentage of the near future projects that you spoke about throughout your presentation. What percentage of those will be using green hydrogen?
The ones I showed you, all of them. Unless, because there are those who don't like even biogas, which is under California definition considered renewable. So, but they're all considered renewable under California, under CARB definitions.
Yeah, but renewable is irrelevant if it's polluting our atmosphere and making climate problems worse. The definition doesn't mean anything in that, you know, nothing positive to me anyway.
Uh-oh, did Joe just freeze? Oh, yeah.
Okay. There are more than 1,000 hydrogen projects worldwide, and you did a marvelous job of surveying a bunch of them, Keith. Thank you for that. We can expect $300+ billion in them by 2030. And one of that struck me in what you said is I didn't hear anything about any of these projects being in San Diego. Should San Diego County encourage some kind of some hydrogen projects, and in particular hydrogen as a fuel generation thing? And how would we go about doing that? And what would be your thoughts about how to do that?
You know, actually, in all honesty, I hadn't really thought about that. I've not heard of many projects, any hydrogen projects. Well, you have San Diego Gas and Electric. They are working on a couple of projects. Other than that, I have to be honest. Nothing comes to mind. I mean, most of the projects tend to be situated where you have space for wind and solar, where you have kind of methane producing activities like sanitation districts, landfills, and whatnot. But I think once you start to see, it wouldn't surprise me that they'll eventually get to San Diego, but it may be that there just may be some attributes about San Diego that make it, I don't know, for the moment, less than ideal. I can't really be sure.
Interesting. Janice?
I'm scrolling through the comments. There's a lot of comments here that don't have question preceding them. And so I'm trying to.
Okay.
Okay. Well, while you're scrolling, I have a couple more. That's okay.
Okay, great. Sure.
I'd like your thoughts about this business model, Keith. Company called Vortex Energy in southeastern Canada has a proprietary green hydrogen to green ammonia technology. What they're doing is they have property where they're mining and selling industrial salt, and that salt is used for things like de-icing roads and water treatment, chemical manufacturing, and so forth. And they're using their salt caverns to store hydrogen, very much what you were saying earlier. And they're planning to transform global transportation with ammonia, shipping ammonia for hydrogen, with hydrogen content, because it's 5 times denser than hydrogen itself. And they're planning 350,000 tons of green ammonia per year. And they have signed a contract with Germany to purchase their ammonia for hydrogen fuel, et cetera. What do you think about that as a business model?
They get large enough volumes, it probably makes sense. One of the key issues is, how do you transport that hydrogen? Do you transport it in a gaseous format, which requires tanks?
Their plan is ammonia.
Right. But to kind of put this in context, you can either do liquid storage, but ammonia allows you to store that hydrogen at ambient pressure and ambient temperature.
Right. But then it takes a bunch of energy to get back to the hydrogen.
But if it's coming from renewables, it's renewable.
That's true.
Renewable component. And I also want to add, because I've had people say, well, precious renewables, and I'm like, don't renewables exist in the same universe of continuous improvement? When I hear that argument, because we're going to be improving solar, wind, we're seeing geothermal finally coming to the fore now. The Western Governors Association, led by the Colorado Governor Jared Polis, that's been their issue over the last year, because the technology has really been transforming itself. Renewables really kind of alter the equation. And in some cases, it may actually be where it doesn't make sense. But I think we're at the beginning stages of a lot of opportunities across all the decarbonization tools, where we're just, I like to talk a lot. But I do think
Well,
I can see it happening. We already have the ammonia transport corridors, and ammonia becomes a really interesting option. You've got folks like Gencell out of Israel, which uses that ammonia as a storage mechanism for backup power systems. And again, with the efficiency argument, you could say, well, you could use small batteries to back up cell phone towers. But again, the charge doesn't hold. So then you have to look for a longer term storage mechanism. And so, for example, hydrogen embedded in ammonia becomes that storage medium. And it really, so again, like I said, there's all these different sort of levers or criteria that you're using that go beyond efficiency. It's about cost, what works, productivity, and certainly resiliency. Because you can talk about efficiency till you're blue in the face, but if your battery electric bus in the heat of the Las Vegas summer only gets you 50 miles, it's about what's going to work best. And also remembering that technologies are going to improve. And if my colleagues from the battery electric community keep talking about, we're going to get battery costs down, we're going to get them lightweighted, we're going to be able to hold more energy, we can make the same arguments as well in hydrogen. Sorry, that sounded like a passionate defense, and I apologize.
passion is okay. Passion is allowed. Janice?
Kelly asked what your feelings are about blending hydrogen into natural gas pipelines.
I think it's a transitional activity with the goal ultimately being hydrogen fully. We're already seeing it in Europe. They're calling it the hydrogen backbone or the European backbone project. We're starting to see it here in California. They're beginning to test it. Hydrogen, though, that pipeline system becomes potentially a multi-billion-dollar storage mechanism and a transport medium. Because a lot of times what we talk about as we deal with the costs of hydrogen and transporting it, pipelines become a very interesting option.
And there was another question about transport and concerns about cooling it for transport and that it takes a lot of energy to do so.
Yep. But it also gets you a much lighter truck. It also gets you a much longer range. Well, I'm actually talking about storing it on board a heavy duty truck. So again, you're taking kind of all these different considerations and where are we going to get, how are we going to maximize this? So it uses a lot of energy. It ultimately depends on, is that going to get you more mileage? Is that going to get you more return on investment? But I think you're going to see more liquid storage coming to the fore. And I think you're also going to see things, like I said about those metal hydrides, that becomes a very interesting proposition over time.
I know I haven't done justice to the comments and the questions in the chat. Is there a way for people to get in touch with you if they have additional questions?
I am on LinkedIn. You can link in with me. I post aggressively. I also produce a hydrogen news clips distribution. So if you send me your email, I'll add you to it. I do what no one else does. I read the stories. You get the headline, the link, and excerpts. Also, my email is on the slide deck. So I'm happy to try and answer your questions or at least refer you on to an appropriate resource.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
And I can even, the NCCCA. Oh, wow,
Yes.
that's so real. Yeah,
That's
even
mouthful.
refer you to additional speakers who can take you deeper. Like I said, my job is to know a little about everything, but not a lot about any one thing. So.
Another big question, big picture question, if I might, this might be the last, but the U.S. Department of Energy has released a national clean hydrogen strategy and roadmap.
Yeah.
There are a couple of aspects to that that I'm curious about. One is the DOE claims in that document to have 95 patents for hydrogen that could contribute to it being commercialized. And related to that, so I'll give it's a multi-part question. Part one, can anyone use these patents? Are there limitations since they're, created by DOE and it's our public money? They also have a goal, as you said, to achieve $1 per kilo in 1 decade. How realistic of that is that? And finally, DOE suggests in this roadmap that they have 50 to 70 gigawatts of nuclear energy that they think should be allocated to produce clean hydrogen. We, at least I, and I think many of the people on the call are not very happy with nuclear energy. And my thought would be, how can we stop the nuclear energy being used to create hydrogen fuel?
Yeah. So with the patents, I do know because of a colleague who is building a hydrogen investment firm and has spoken with DOE folks. I know they are looking for partners to take that technology out into the world and develop it. I'll just leave it at that. I don't know if it's necessarily free, but I don't think it's necessarily hard to get at. I think with the right investment partners, you can utilize those patents. I think they're willing to almost give them away as long as they make money off the patents ultimately. As for nuclear power, remember we have 50 states. So unless at the federal government level, they establish a prohibition, I think you're going to see implementation different in a lot of these states. So what we define as renewable in California, like we do not define nuclear as renewable here. We define it as zero carbon. You may remember from SB 100, which is transforming the electrical grid. They talk about 60% renewable and 40% zero carbon. That bill wasn't 100% renewable. There was a recognition that we may need some other methods as well. So that said, each state's gonna probably handle it differently. You'll see groups of states that align with California and others less so. And I can also tell you what I'm seeing up in the state of Washington, a lot of startups up there with kind of newer versions of nuclear fission and some working on nuclear fusion. I assume you saw that announcement a couple of months ago that Jennifer Granholm did. So I don't know what else to say about nuclear. I can just tell you what I've seen. But there is an expectation, even in the hydrogen hub legislation, nuclear is included.
Well, in my view, there are 20 pages in Mark Jacobson's No Miracles Needed that anybody reading that in finishing those 20 pages that thinks nuclear is any part of the solution for our climate problem, it's just not. There are so many issues, not least of which is cost and limited time, 15 years to do an implementation of one nuclear plant and many related issues. Anyway, that's a view based upon Mark's work and a lot of others that I've read and so forth. Janice Moore, are you done?
Like I said, I don't think I could possibly do justice to all the questions and comments in the chat with the limited amount of time that we have. So I would encourage everyone to reach out and follow Keith and share your concerns and questions and positive remarks with him.
Yeah, well, maybe that somebody in San Diego County will jump in and do something and surprise us. That would be nice, perhaps.
So
I'll
I'm
do
gonna-
I'll do some research and see what I can find, but I don't recall any projects.
Okay, thanks, Maria.
Any.
Well, anyway, I just wanted to jump in here and thank you, Keith, for leading a very interesting discussion this evening. We certainly learned a lot, and it's our goal here at NCCCA to educate people and not tell them how to think, but to allow them to ask questions. And sometimes we agree on things and sometimes we don't, and that's just the nature of things. But thank you very much for sharing your time and expertise with us. We do appreciate it. I just wanted to let you know that here at NCCA, we do have a custom. We like to thank our speakers. And what we do is we will purchase a tree in your honor. And you're going to really like this, Keith, because it is a California native tree. And it's going to be planted in an area that has been hit by the wildfires that we've had over the last few years. And so again, thank you very, very much. And I also want to thank our audience for your discussion, and hope to see you guys all next month. So take care, everybody. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.